Yep.
Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this presentation, which is part of an ongoing GOOS webinar series exploring issues and projects associated with global sustained ocean observing. I'm Albert Fisher. I'm the director of the Global Ocean Observing System Program Office, which is headquartered at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO in Paris, and I'll be moderating today. For the next hour, we'll start with an about 30-minute presentation from Tommy Moore, who is the coordinator of the Pacific Islands Global Ocean Observing System Regional Alliance, which is made up of 21 Pacific Island countries and territories, and it covers the largest physical area of any of our GOOS Regional Alliances. After Tommy's presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session by chat. I'll moderate and ask the questions verbally. The chat window is open now already, and so you can start asking questions if you want to ask any clarifying questions during the talk, and if not, ask your questions after the talk. The session's being recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted on the GOOS webpage. So Tommy, I'll turn it over to you for the presentation. If you could turn your video on, that would be great.
All right. Yes, thank you, Albert. Sorry, I'm connecting via computer and phone because our internet here is a bit slow today. But yeah, I'm Dr. Tommy Moore. I'm the Pacific Islands Global Ocean Observing System Officer here at SPREP. And I'm sorry, I'll show you a picture other than what the table looks like in a second. All right. Yes, sorry. And yes, thanks for inviting me to host this webinar or to present at this webinar. And I'll try to keep things short and to the point because at least those of you in Europe are up fairly late, and I thank you for staying up. All right, so getting started. As Albert said, the PI-GOOS Regional Alliance area is the largest of the regional alliances. It covers the Pacific Islands region, shown here in the center of the map, the large box there. And in the region, we view it to cover all of the SPREP member countries. SPREP is the Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environmental Organization, a regional intergovernmental organization, and I'll discuss that a bit more later. But overall, it's made up of 21 Pacific Island countries and territories with support from 5 metropolitan contributing countries, the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, UK, and France. And shown here in dark blue are the EEZs of our member countries, just to give an idea of kind of the area we cover. Overall, this area is larger than the United States and has a surface area comparable to that of the surface area of the moon. So, broad, expansive area. Challenges facing it, though, are it's also composed largely of developing countries and small populations spread out across vast areas. So there are very few urban centers and instead a number of small villages on remote islands. So logistically, it's a challenging area to work in. All right, so just a brief overview of what PI-GOOS is, and then I can move into some more information about the region. Overall, the aim of PI-GOOS is to assist in the sustainable development of Pacific Island nations. And this is an establishment and implementation of observing programs, uptake and use of data, and just basic support to the region on oceanographic issues and coordination of regional and international initiatives. It was established as a GRA in 1998 and originally was based with the SOPAC, the Southern Ocean Pacific, or Southern Pacific a Geosciences Commission. I'm not sure where the A came from, but anyways, in 2007, the role was transferred to SPREP when SOPAC merged with our sister agency, SPC. And currently our primary sponsors are IOC UNESCO through the Perth Pacific office and the US NOAA Argo Program, who we help with supporting Argo Program and float deployment in the region. The 4 key areas defined in the kind of strategic plan for PI-GOOS are looking at communications, so effective communication of oceanographic and ocean observing materials, both for use by countries and to ensure or to help with support of global initiatives, support for marine observing programs such as, again, the Argo Program and the Tropical Pacific Observing System, data access and management, working to help our member countries learn how to access and make best use of data available, and education and training. There's a large capacity gap in the region concerning oceans, and we're working to prioritize training in marine areas so that people are more, or so the region's more able, or better able, excuse me, to make use of the resources that are available. And kind of my selling point for the region is that PI-GOOS is a regional organization. It's not a SPREP-only organization, which is sometimes confused with, but instead it's open to all Pacific Island countries and territories and interested stakeholders. And those are stakeholders both within the region and abroad. And ideally, we're looking to work with all marine stakeholders, focused largely on areas of marine weather and forecasting, maritime trade and transport, tourism, coastal and pelagic fisheries. There's been some discussion here at SPREP on marine debris and pollution as another issue. So just kind of broadly working with all sectors involved in the ocean. All right, so moving into the region, SPREP, the Secretary of Specific Regional Environment Program, is the regional environmental agency of Pacific Islands. Most of the countries in the region don't have the capacity or expertise to have their own specialized agencies or agencies to deal with environmental issues or, in the case of SPC, other types of issues. And so instead they created the Council of Regional Organization of Parties, or CROP agencies, to support them in these efforts. And so SPREP has the regional environment mandate with 4 main focus areas, looking at climate change, which is where I'm based out of, biodiversity and ecosystem management, waste management, and environmental monitoring and governance. And SPREP is answerable to the, or reports annually to our members to the annual SPREP meeting, which is made up of members of the Ministries of the Environment, and every 2 years we have a ministerial component where we report directly to the Ministers for Environment. And within, beneath SPREP, or as part of SPREP, there's the Pacific Meteorological Council, which replaced the regional National Met Services Directors Meeting in 2011 and serves to help coordinate regional meteorological issues. And that's this council is one of the main partners for PI-GOOS, and they're largely responsible for forecasting, observing efforts within the region. And the Secretariat of the the PMC, or Pacific Met Council, is the Pacific Met Desk Partnership. And this is based out of SPREP, and it is another hat I wear in the region supporting that. And we're working to implement or to improve Met services in the region. And I'll touch on that more here in a minute. All right, so as I said, the PMC was formed in 2011 and it's created to facilitate and coordinate scientific and technical programs for regional Met services. Currently, there's a lot of traction on the Global Framework for Climate Services through the WMO, and based on successes they've had there, we're hoping to be able to replicate that on the ocean side. The Met Council advises the SPREP officials meeting on needs and priorities of member countries in relation to weather and climate. And the secretary of that, as I just said, was the Pacific Met Desk Partnership. And we are the working arm of the Pacific Met Council. And I won't go through all the bullet points here, but we're actively working to support the regional national Met services on all the issues they face. And through the Pacific Met Council meeting, which happens every 2 years, we get a a list of priorities for the country so that we know what the regional priority areas are, and I'll touch on that here a bit later. And overall, the Pacific Met Council is guided by the Pacific Islands Meteorological Strategy, which is a 10-year plan looking at priority areas for Met services in the region. And 4 major priority areas for action are improved weather services, multi-hazard early warning systems, enhanced infrastructure, and improved climate services. And just to give you an idea of the structure, in case this is as confusing to you as it has been to me for a while, shown here is a diagram of the different levels of reporting in the region. So overall, we report to the SPREP meeting, which is our officials meeting. Beneath that is Pacific Met Council, which again is the regional National Met Services Directors meeting. And then that is guided by the Pacific Island Met Strategy, and beneath that is the Met Desk Partnership, where we actually work to implement the decisions made by the Pacific Met Council and the SPREP meeting. Just for relevance to for PI-GOOS and the marine system in general, in the Pacific Island Met Strategy, there's 3 main key outcomes that we're looking at. First one, PKO2, is improving marine weather services. This is something that's been largely neglected in the region, in part due to kind of technical challenges and costs. The second one is that falls under as multi-hazard early warning systems, namely for cyclones, storm surges, waves, and tsunamis. There is a tsunami monitoring system in the region. I think it's largely supported through the Pacific Tsunami Center in Hawaii. But for other issues, it's a bit more varied, especially for marine issues such as storm surges and waves. Most countries will issue small craft advisories, but those aren't widely taken up. And issues of safety at sea for small-scale fishermen and coastal inundation were noted as key priority areas out of the last Pacific Met Council meeting, and is something we're actively searching for funding for to improve in the region. And then the last PKO for relevant to PI-GOOS is the improved quality of observation and coverage of networks. For me, I would really like to see an improvement or an increased coverage or increased ocean observing capacity within the region. Sorry. All right, so moving on to just a summary of kind of activities related to PI-GOOS in the region. For ocean observations, as I've alluded to already, it's largely reliant on global initiatives and some of the repeat hydrography lines. The major global initiatives I'll touch on a bit more are things like the Argo Program, the Tropical Pacific Observing System, and the Surface Drifters Program. For measurements that are taken within the region, most are focused on fisheries and are either associated with commercial tuna fisheries or local fisheries agencies doing fisheries counts and some reef monitoring throughout the region. However, most of this data is not widely released or accessible, and there isn't a lot of quality control, so it's tougher to view it on a global scale. Also, through the U.S. and Australia, there's various sea level monitoring programs I'll touch on. And what I think is one of the major observing gaps is the number of wave buoys in the region. Currently, there are 2 wave buoys, or wave buoys in the region consist of a wave buoy deployed by PacIOOS in Marshall Islands, and then the PacIOOS network of wave buoys in Hawaii. There was, for about 6 months, a wave buoy in American Samoa that slipped free from its mooring and has yet to be redeployed. I think Melissa can speak on that if she wishes to. And then there's discussion of buoy deployments out of New Caledonia and Fiji. However, I know for the Fiji buoy, there's discussion of where it should go and just support for maintenance of the buoy, because as you probably are aware of, it's not enough just to put something in the water. You have to be able to take care of it. All right, so just a coverage of the Pacific Sea Level Monitoring Program. This is the Australian component. Shown here are all the sites where there are tide gauges and sea level monitoring gauges. And this program has provided a great service for the region. In addition to just recording sea level, they have a real-time data display, and they also provide the region with annual tide calendars. And so with the real-time data display and tide calendars, it's quite easy, that's the essentials for some of the countries to generate their inundation forecasting. So this program's been running since, in part, since 1993, giving enough data to be able to actually observe the increase in sea level for the region. And for coastal inundation forecasting, like in terms of, in the case of Kiribati, the tide calendars are what they use for their inundation forecasting when they're looking at inundation. They are mainly basing their forecasts off of the king or spring tides. And there's currently a little limited capacity to be looking at storm surges and that contribution to inundation. So this is one of the areas that we're hoping to be able to improve on in the coming years. Shown here is the Data Buoy Cooperation Panel's monthly map of moored and drifting buoys. And this is just to show the kind of coverage of the region on a global scale. The red dots across the equator is the Tropical Pacific Observing System, and this is largely supported by the U.S. and Japan, with Japanese support decreasing. And as you're probably aware, there's the TPOS 2020 committee or working group that is looking at evaluating the current status of the array and what its future could look like. And coming from the Pacific Islands region, any type of El Nino forecasting and observing is extremely important. Most of the region, or half the region, is currently in drought due to the current El Nino, so accurate forecasting of the ENSO and marine climatology in general is very important. Also shown on here are in yellow are the tsunami buoys. Another important feature here due to the high amounts of tectonic activity and the high occurrence of destructive tsunamis. And then just showing the other coverage in the region comes from the surface drifting buoys, most of which are recording surface temperatures and surface velocities. The other major source of data for the region is the Argo program. So shown here is the Argo float density. This figure is a bit out of date, but the coverage hasn't changed much since then. And while it looks like there is very dense coverage across the region, you have to remember that most of these floats are around 3 degrees, are separated by about 3 degrees. So the actual coverage is quite sparse, and you're only getting data every 10 days. So it's useful for climatology and for large-scale processes and ground truthing of models, but isn't providing enough data to be for like short-term marine weather forecasting. All right. In terms of modeling, for the most recent GOOS Regional Alliances forum, and I guess it's from the previous one and reported on at the most recent forum, there's an inventory of models in the regions. For me, this was actually a fairly easy report to look at because there's very limited modeling activities in the region, and this is another serious gap I'd like to see remedied. One of the one modeling activity in the region is the WMO Coastal Inundation Forecasting Demonstration Project. This is a coastal inundation forecasting project in Fiji where they have high-resolution bathymetry in the coastal region and are working on making a dynamic model for inundation issues. The challenge of this is that for most of the region, I'd say well in excess of 90%, there is not high-resolution bathymetry, so doing any type of dynamic model based on current flow and storm surge is not feasible. And just the logistics of trying to get high-resolution bathymetry for the region, it would be quite daunting. From the PacIOOS side, since Marshall Islands is one of our member countries, I step on Melissa's toes a bit, or I don't take credit for her work, but I appreciate it. They have recently launched a coastal inundation forecasting program for the Marshall Islands, mainly Marjaro and I'm forgetting the other island. But from what I've seen, this is a fairly successful program. And in addition to just having the forecasting or the forecast, they also produced a very comprehensive preparatory manual for local residents on how to prepare for inundation events. And beyond that, the region's heavily reliant on global models and trying to use them for surface currents and coral bleaching forecasts, things of that sort. One challenge of these models is they're often the smallest grid size you can get is 5 kilometers. And for some of the area, an entire island will disappear in a 5-kilometer grid point. Or for like the case of Samoa, Wairmat, you have just 2 or 3 or 4 grid points that make up all of your forecasts. So they're not extremely useful on a small scale, but much appreciated on the regional scale. And in terms of education and capacity building, this is an area we're getting more traction on. And one of the initiatives for looking at the grade school levels is the CREAD program. This is supported by the Argo program and is looking at raising basic competencies on oceanography in general in the grade school levels, I think across all ages. And this has been running for a few years now with trainings in Tonga and moving into Kiribati now. And moving outside of our region, there's also been some interest by Timor-Leste. So we're happy to continue to support this, and hopefully we'll see some benefits from it in the years to come. Another program that's been of use or great benefit to the region is the COSPAC program. This is an Australian-supported program, and it's the Climate Ocean Services program for the Pacific. I may have just mucked that up, but it's fairly close. And one thing of interest that they've been working on is their Oceans and Tides training. This is a training that was rolled out initially in the Solomon Islands and is training Met Services and other interested stakeholders on just about basic oceanography and tides, trying to look on a more practical applied approach for what does it mean to them and how can they use this information, and includes a fair number of hands-on activities. And another initiative that's recently taken off here is the Data Buoy Cooperation Panel's capacity building workshop. This is supported through the WMO and IOC. If Tom Gross is on, he's been a great help here. And we'll be having our second workshop in May. The first one is held in Palau, and I felt it was a great success and helped to get some momentum going in the region. And hopefully we can continue to build on that at the next workshop. So just a quick summary of some of the current activities and priority areas. I'll just kind of make this a quick summary and not get into too much detail. Recently, SPREP, myself in particular as project manager, have been funded by New Zealand for the Pacific Partnership on Ocean Acidification. What we're looking to do here is roll out pilot programs in 3 or 4 pilot sites across the region to work with communities on adaptation to ocean acidification. Since the only real way to adapt to ocean acidification is to remove CO2 from seawater or reduce emissions, this is something that the Pacific Islands can't really do anything about. So instead, we're working on building resilience primarily in coastal communities for both socially and environmentally by addressing the issues that are negatively impacting these areas. So what we're looking at is for building resilience, especially in coral reefs, by limiting other anthropogenic stressors such as eutrophication, sedimentation, destructive fishing, and things of that sort. And in some cases, we may be looking to alternate livelihoods for local communities because traditionally they've been heavily reliant on coastal fisheries for both food and income. And if these fisheries continue to decline, this will help address that. Again, support for the Data Buoy Cooperation Panel's workshops is a current activity and a priority for me. And I'm also involved with the TPOS 2020. I'm a member of the, or I'm on the resource forum and participated in the Backbone Committee's meeting last year, which is informative, and I look forward to what comes out or what comes around this year. And as I said, coastal inundation is a major issue for the region, as is safety at sea, largely for small-scale fishermen. What I mean by this is local villagers who go out, especially past the reef break fishing. There's a high incidence of mortality or people spending weeks or months at sea drifting to the neighboring country before they're rescued. And this is largely due to a lack of safety equipment on boats and receiving effective forecasts of what is coming in the near future so that you're not stranded in a small boat out out in 20 or 30 foot seas. Another area that SPREP is taking the lead on for the region is marine spatial planning. And we have a history of this through supporting locally marine managed areas networks, marine protected areas. And this is something we're looking to get a bit more formalized in the region and better understanding of. A couple of things I forgot to note on the on this slide I was reminded of is through the Pacific Met Council, they've recently formed the Pacific Islands Marine and Ocean Services Panel, and through this we'll be looking to prioritize oceans in the region, and should be a big step forward in improving conditions. And one thing I've noted for myself is we have a need to expand beyond just focusing on the National Met Services. They are great partners and do a lot for the region, but we also need to be sure to be inclusive of other sectors such as marine trade and transport, tourism and fisheries, to make sure that information we're generating is widely received and that we're aware of the needs and concerns of these other stakeholders. And I believe, yeah, that is my final slide, so I guess I'm 2 minutes early for my 30-minute time limit.
Thanks a lot, Tommy. And if you can actually click to start your webcam, then we could actually see each other. That would be great. So thanks a lot.
I realized I had it turned on, but I didn't actually share it the whole time.
Preview, but didn't get going. So I thank you very much for the talk. I'd encourage people to start asking questions in the chat box, and while we're waiting for questions to appear there, I'll ask them. So Tommy, you mentioned that one of the main goals of GOOS is really to respond to sustainable development, and at the global scale, the UN has just adopted some sustainable development goals and is working on how to measure whether we're meeting those goals, working on indicators. Are these SDGs, are they something that are being talked about in the region, or does sustainable development mean something much more local to the Pacific Island countries?
Yeah, thanks for that, Albert. Sustainable development does mean something very local, but it's also the SDGs and previously the MDGs are very important for the region because it helps in a number of ways direct development aid that comes in and gives some very well thought out tangibles to work towards. And here at SPREP, we did help comment on the SDGs for the region to make sure that they were inclusive of our needs and kind of just overall representative, and it is something that we're aware of and working on reporting towards. And as part of our EMG division, Environmental Monitoring Governance Division, they do help the countries to report on the progress on these.
Okay. And of the Sustainable Development Goals, there is one focused on the oceans, Sustainable Goal number 14. And there's a plan for a conference every 3 years. Look at the Ocean Sustainable Development Goal, see where we are, and how far along we are in meeting that goal. And the first one will be in 2017 in Fiji, so it will be in the Pacific Islands area. So that might be a good opportunity to really engage the PI-GOOS countries. So let me ask Howard's question. What do you see as the largest challenge that Pacific Islands goose will face in the next few years?
Yeah, thanks for that, Howard. I think one of the bigger challenges is just sustainable funding. That's been the challenge here at SPREP to keep the program active, and I'm working to kind of reinvigorate the program and remind people it exists in the region because it was largely dormant for a number of years due to just a funding gap here at SPREP for the coordinator for the PI-GOOS officer position. And I'm hoping by getting some funded projects up and running and more engagement with our regional partners that even if the coordinated role here at SPREP isn't funded, it will continue on its own. And for your side question about the carnage in Australia for CSIRO, it will definitely have a significant impact. We're waiting to hear where the layoffs are going to happen because a number of our partners we work with quite closely are based out of there, and I think it's just going to be a major loss to the region and kind of the global activities as a whole.
And so for those of you on the line who don't know about that, if you Google SARO in Australia, you'll see that there is a proposal to cut quite a lot of climate research out of SARO, which would certainly have an impact on observations in the whole southern hemisphere. So coming back to PI-GOOS, you mentioned that you do have quite a lot of work and relationship with the Pacific Met Council and with the Met services in the region. And those Met services have a lot of interest in climate services and the global framework for climate services. So do they have, is there a clear sense of who the major user sectors are for climate services? Can you easily divide it in the countries amongst civil defense, agriculture, water management? What are the major areas where climate services are needed? Yeah.
I'll try to get this right because our Met and Climate officer's here with me, so I'll get corrected if I don't. This is something we're working with the NMSs in the region, are actively working with them on. Major users are the agricultural sectors. There's a large part of the population here are very agricultural dependent. And we're also working to engage, or we also work a lot with the National Disaster Management Offices. For example, Marshall Islands issued a state of emergency warning concerning their drought, as a large part of their population is currently without water. And so we work with them, especially providing seasonal forecasts and making sure that that they're able to effectively deliver information to communities. We're working on expanding into working with forestries. Like the Samoan Met Service here has a seasonal forecast, and part of what they look at is fire hazard. You wouldn't think that fire is a big issue in the tropics, but it surprisingly is. A few days without rain is quite noticeable. And we're working to expand to other key sectors such as water security and as well. It's just some of that's just trying to find the best way to address that. And for oh, yes, and health. Sorry, I got reminded of that. For health, this is something that COSPAC has been a big support on, is looking at looking at disease transmission such as malaria, and setting up warning systems based on the current conditions. And oh yes, and renewable energy. Wow, I'm forgetting all the key areas we work with. But yeah, we've been working actively with other countries for the larger island state or large high island states. A lot of them are reliant on hydroelectricity for a significant fraction or portion of their energy generation, and yeah, warning of a drought is quite important. Yeah, the Marshall Islands drought is connected to El Nino. Generally, the western central Pacific suffers from drought during El Nino because the kind of wet pool or the warm pool, as it moves east, takes most of the rain with it as the intertropical convergence zone and the moves more westerly. So currently, I believe there's drought in Marshall Islands, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and I think they've canceled the drought warnings here for Samoa. But all across the Western Pacific, there's well below average rainfall. And further to the east, for the El Nino, there's above average rainfall, and another impact of an El Nino year is there's typically more and stronger cyclones. And there's currently, as we speak, there's a tropical depression that's likely to form into a cyclone forming between Vanuatu and Fiji. And the other challenge with El Nino, more marine related, is it's also a higher incidence of coral bleaching. And according to what I've read, we're currently in what's considered the third major coral bleaching event globally. And for the region, there has been very high incidence of coral bleaching, and it'll be a trying time for reefs, I think, because we'll see how fast they can recover from this, or if they can recover.
So you mentioned one of the projects that you're working on, it's on the screen there, the New Zealand Pacific Partnership on Ocean Acidification. Bleaching is another threat to corals. So what kind of projects are you working on to build the resilience of communities, and what is the link? Is there a particular link to corals, and what are the types of activities that will reduce the vulnerability of communities?
So for the for Ocean Acidification project, there has been, in research has been found a link where ocean acidification will increase susceptibility to coral bleaching, and a lot of our work is going to focus on coral reefs, as they are, for the region, they're the most vulnerable species. What we plan on looking at is working with communities for better coastal resource management, and looking at building and restoring coral reef health, so that hopefully into the future they'll have a fighting chance as conditions worsen. This is really only looking forward but 30 to 50 years, because if there's not a significant reduction in emissions, then more significant actions will probably have to be taken. And so the other thing we'll be working with communities is trying to develop alternate livelihoods that are less reliant upon coral reefs. So some of this might be developing aquaculture and mariculture, preferably in a fashion that has an environmental benefit. And some other actions have been taken in the region of putting near-shore fish aggregating devices, or FADs, so that villages have access to a different source of fish near the shore. Basically, you can attract deep water fish near shore, and provides a different source of protein that's not dependent upon the reef.
Okay. And you talk generally about the challenge of working with countries that have quite limited populations, don't often have a government agency or ministry that's focused on ocean observations. How often do you even have contact with all of the 21 countries or territories in the region of PI-GOOS?
SPREP as a whole has fairly regular contact as countries at any time can submit a request for assistance. And through our work with the National Met Services offices, we have regular contact with them. And for like the newly formed Pacific Islands Marine Ocean Services panel, that is the panel for that is largely made up of members of National Met Services. For some of the other sectors, we have contacted with them largely when we're working in country on a project. But in general, while our technical capabilities in the region are low, one of the strengths of the region is there's a really strong integration across the region and a strong network of partnerships both within the islands and their partner countries like the U.S. and Australia. So that is one of the great strengths of the region.
And again, coming back to the Met Services, they're focused largely on shorter-term issues. So you mentioned the tropical cyclones, the storm surges, waves, but also tsunamis. So do they generally have responsibility for disaster risk reduction and early warning in these countries, or are they working in partnership with other agencies within the country?
Most of the countries, or most of the National Met Service in the countries advise their national disaster management offices. So in general, they work quite closely with these offices, and in the case of some countries, they will issue like cyclone warnings and emergency warnings after consultation with the disaster management offices. Others have more autonomy, and it kind of depends on the disaster. For things like tsunamis, the Met Services are generally the office that monitors that 24/7 and will issue a warning on short notice. So yeah, it's a mix, and in some countries it's more effective than others. But in general, the Met Services work closely with the disaster management offices.
And what is the service outlet particularly for the types of warnings you were talking about, and maybe particularly for the Marine Weather Services focused on the local fishermen? Are these through bulletins that are broadcast on air? Are there other ways of getting what's the most common way that a fisherman might receive a warning about waves, for example?
This is one of the challenges for the region, because especially remote communities, most of them are reliant on radio, using HF radio. And the challenge with this is these communities are reliant either on generators for power or solar, and at night generally the radio is shut off, or throughout the day if they're not using it, the generator is shut off, and so the radio isn't on. There's been improvement in some of this throughout the region. Like there's the RayNet program that met just a couple weeks ago in Hawaii, and they're focusing on communications across the region. So like one of their products that's quite popular is the Chatty Beetle, which is a short burst iridium receiver, I guess has sending has capacity to send messages. And this is something that we're looking at for disaster preparedness and delivery of early warning systems, and is a program that SPREP is engaged in partnership with Finland on working to make sure that warnings and forecasts reach communities and there's effective uptake of these messages. So it's very much a challenge, and yeah, mainly it's HF radio is the broadcast mechanism.
How widely developed are cell phone networks or mobile phone networks? Are a lot of people out of range of networks?
For the small communities, most of them are out of range. In urban centers, there is generally quite good cell phone coverage, and for warnings and alerts, their messages are pushed out through the cell networks. So these areas have decent coverage. It's the challenge is the more remote communities, some of which can be hundreds of miles away from the capital cities and have very limited contact.
And then you talked about the different types of ocean observations that are available for the region. Of course, there's projections of the global networks into the region, but with limited spatial coverage or temporal coverage. And you talked about data that's produced by the countries themselves. You said there's quite a lot of fisheries data, and there's some wave observations and quite a few sea level observations. So coming back to the fisheries data, it's obviously largely connected to the species that they're going after, but there's probably some ancillary data. And you mentioned that it's not really shared. What is the barrier to the wider sharing of that fisheries data in the region? Is it fears over competition?
Yeah.
Is it fears over competition over resources, or is it really just that no framework has been set up for the sharing of the data?
Based on my interactions, I think it's largely there's no framework set up for the sharing of the data, and there is some worry about exploitation of the data, in that kind of the colonial approach of take a resource and run with no benefit back to the communities. So I think one challenge is when sharing a resource or like data, you need to be able to show that there is a benefit to the collectors for what they get out of it, or even just as simply as acknowledging where you got the data from, just stating the ministry and key contact point goes a big step towards developing trust. But I think it's largely due to a framework for sharing.
And then the Pacific Nation, I think one of the things they like to say in global negotiations is that they're small islands, but they're big ocean nations. They really have large territories in their exclusive economic zones. But how much do local populations really feel that? How much are they aware of it, or how much are they really focusing much more on the coastal ocean in terms of their use and exploitation of the ocean?
Most of the islands are, I'd say, extremely, if not entirely, dependent upon the coastal ocean and nearshore resources, especially when you move into the small islands and the atoll nations. Taking the island of Tarawa and Kiribati, for example, that's where the main urban center is. The atoll itself is generally less than 100 meters wide, and the high point on the island or the atoll is less than 4 meters. So coastal ocean is what you have. And especially at low tides, the fastest way from one side of the atoll to the other is just to walk across the ribbon reefs in the lagoon, because you can save yourself a 60-kilometer drive around the edge of the lagoon by just shortcutting across it. And also per capita, the region, especially the rural communities, are more heavily reliant on coastal fisheries for protein than pretty much anywhere else in the world. So it's a very, it's a very important area.
So are some of the larger islands becoming aware of the rest of their EEZ and sort of what resources are available in it, and thinking about sustainable development of those resources? And is that connected with the marine spatial planning activities that you've mentioned?
Yeah, this is an area where both SPREP and SPC work on. SPC has the more formalized program for working with EEZs, and SPREP has taken the lead on marine spatial planning. But things like the commercial tuna fisheries in the region are a major source of income for a number of countries. And there's been development in the areas of, or interest in like deep sea mining and other forms of mineral exploitation in the country's EEZs. So most of them are fairly aware of this. I think some areas of challenge are things like marine scientific research and technology transfer, which there was recently a workshop related to that in Thailand, focused on the for Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia, which sounds like it had mixed success, but is a step in the right direction, I think.
And then some of the other observations you mentioned that are being taken really locally are the few wave observation sites, and you mentioned that there's been difficulty in keeping them maintained. Are they too sparse to be used for safety services? That's one of the difficulties in maintaining them. What do you think is the challenge to actually maintaining these wave monitoring sites?
I think it largely comes down to kind of financial and physical resources. Again, Melissa can correct me if I get wrong, if I'm misspeak on PacIOOS's behalf, but for the wave buoy that was deployed in American Samoa, it slipped free from its mooring and did a nice tour around the island. Just about came over here to Western Samoa, but circled back at the last minute and was some of the staff at the Marine Park were able to recover it. But one challenge is even though there's a Coast Guard station in American Samoa, they don't have any ships there. So they had no way of rescuing it themselves and had to rely on volunteers. And for the rest of the region, there's limited to no naval capacity, and so, and then that combined with the lack of monetary resources makes it quite challenging to deploy and maintain offshore buoys. But in general, like wave buoys are would be a benefit to the regions. You'd have better verification and calibration of the global wave model products, which would then can be used for better coastal inundation forecasting and better safety at sea forecasts, or small craft advisory forecasts.
And a lot of the wave forecasts come just from wind models, and how good are those in the region? Are they pretty far off from observed waves, or is there some utility in those?
Based on, I'm not sure, I haven't done a lot of the technical work on this, but based on some of the conversations with some of the surfing community here in Samoa, while the wave buoy in American Samoa is running, the surf forecasts here were quite a bit better, both in terms of swell height and energy. So I think that having a buoy here would be useful. I mean, in comparison, this would be comparable to having one buoy representing all of the United States and trying to generate wave forecast for it, or all of Europe. You know, it's the one buoy is useful, but better coverage gives you much better confidence in your models.
And the DBC does have a pilot project to put some wave sensors on the surface drifting mooring, surface drifting buoys. Again, there's sort of sparse coverage in the region, but there is, they do drift through the region quite a bit. Would that be of help, or is it really better to have these local measurements?
No, I think that would be a great benefit. Like they've shown that for, especially for the buoys where they have surface air pressure, they're some of the most valuable for the global forecast model or global atmospheric models. And I think getting more coverage of waves through the surface drifter program would be of great benefit to the region. And yeah, so I think that'd be great. The other thing we've been looking at is ships of opportunity and exploring how we can get more observing platforms installed there, because most of the islands are reliant on trade ships for fuel and supplies. So there's a wide network of boats across the region that can provide quite a bit of information.
Has there been any questions, Prep, about any regulation or to try to really push that commercial ships are instrumented?
I think initially we would need to show, we need to just get essentially a pilot project up and running to show the value of instrumenting ships before we could push too hard to have it mandated for all coverage. So initially it'd be best to work on a volunteer basis and just try to find some support to get a few ships instrumented and build from there.
Then let me come back to one of your final points, which was about education and capacity building. Do you have any links to UNESCO education programs in the region?
I'm trying to think. I know I've been in contact with the Ocean Teacher Global Academy, and we've been discussing setting up a regional training center in the region. And their next steering committee is coming up in May, I believe, and it will continue those discussions. Some of the challenges we run into with them is the just lack of good internet connection, but I think we could work out a model that's slightly different than their current norm to do that in the region. And beyond that, we've had some discussions, but I don't think anything has been formally put in place.
And you mentioned CREAD program, which is really focused on, as I understand it, is on primary school education or secondary school education, and more generally about the ocean and climate, rather than specifically about ocean observations or any kind of technical aspects of it. How do you see? I mean, how do you see education connecting into developing capacity in the region? Do you think it's a really long road, and is there things that you'd like to see developed that are more focused and more focused on delivering and improving ocean observations and the capacity to deliver services?
I think there's a need for a long-term commitment for capacity development in oceans in the region, but there's definitely things that can be done in the short term. Like for a lot of the Met services, using them as an example, their officers don't have full degrees. Instead, they have technical certifications, and some sort of program centered around that on just having people technically certified or trained on interpretation and making of forecasts, and just establishing of like standard operating procedures and forecast methodologies would go a long ways towards improving things in the region, and that would help with the immediate issues while people are being more formally trained in oceanography as a whole.
All right, then a final question for you, which is about, we have 13 GOOS Regional Alliances. Pacific Islands is one of them, and back in September we had a meeting of all the GOOS Regional Alliances, and one of the ideas we're trying to develop is some of the mutual assistance between GOOS Regional Alliances. So did you see any prospects come out of that meeting, and how can we help you develop some of those in the future?
Yes, thanks for that. I meant to mention that program, and it slipped my mind. Sorry about that. We do work quite closely with PacIOOS. I've mentioned Melissa Iwamoto, who's on here. She's their the lead there in Hawaii, or her and Chris. So we work very closely with them, and I talk frequently with Tim Moltmann. And one of my plans for the year is to set up probably a three-way meeting to figure out how we can best cooperate and partner on addressing issues in the Pacific Islands region. And yeah, if there's any other regional alliances that we can work with, we're more than happy to do so.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. Thank you very much for giving the talk, and thanks for your energy and that you're bringing to the region. I do want to thank everybody that was online as well. And the next GOOS webinar is actually next week, and we'll be hearing from another GOOS Regional Alliance from Glenn Nolan, who's Executive Director of EuroGOOS. So thanks again very much, Tommy, and good night to all.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining in, and thanks Albert for allowing me this chance.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everyone.